This week on Merchants of Change, we've got Samantha Schlicht. Samantha was a cheerleader at the University of Minnesota for the Gophers before transitioning to sales with Honeywell. Today, she's a senior commercial account executive with fast growth, publicly traded company Zscaler. Here she is, Samantha Schlicht.
I'm J.R. Butler, co-founder and CEO of the Schlicht Group, and you're listening to Merchants of Change. This is a podcast about transferring the skills and behaviors we acquire as athletes and military veterans into becoming a professional salesperson. Each week, we'll introduce you to a top performer who will help us understand how they became professional merchants of change.
What's up, kid? Today on the show, we got Samantha Schlicht. Samantha, thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this conversation. So just for context, for you and for any new listeners, we started the show a couple years ago when we started our company, and we help athletes and veterans successfully transition into the business world. Specifically, most recently, we've been focused really on sales. So what we try to do on the show is bring folks in with athletic or military backgrounds that are, finding their way and having success in sales. And we think it's really good for our candidates to hear and see people like them and hear about their journeys. So we always like to start at the beginning, start with the athletic background, talk a little bit about the transition, and then talk about some lessons learned along the way so far in your career. Sound like a good plan?
Sounds good to me. Let's do it.
I love it. All right. So big, broad question to start. We always like to ask people, going back to your athletic sports career, what are some of your favorite memories when I ask you that question? What pops into your head?
Oh, it's so hard to choose. I would say, first and foremost, it was really cool to cheer for a Big Ten team. So I grew up in Wisconsin. We were a Wisconsin Badgers family. Of course, I went to University of Minnesota. So someone had to be the family disappointment. But no, it just was really cool to be in the Big Ten atmosphere and, have the games, the away games, get to travel. So obviously a really cool experience that I was really grateful for. But I think most athletes would agree that the memories that you think of are always with the team. It's always the funny stuff that happens during practice or the time before practice or the debrief after. If it was a bad one, you got to go get some food and talk about what just happened. But yeah, I would just say being with the girls. And I was thinking about this before, one of my coaches told me this a while ago, you'll move forward in your life and in your career, but one of the things you never really get back is just having a whole squad behind you and always celebrating your success as if it's their success. And, of course, in the moment, we took it seriously, but you don't really realize that until you're out of it. So, cheer it's a team sport, and you really need everyone on the mat doing their thing. So it was just really fun to think about when you nailed a new skill or one girl did something she's been working on forever and, it's for the whole team. So I think about those big moments a lot. And, I miss that and, got good team camaraderie in my job, but that's the stuff that I always think back on.
So I didn't realize the Wisconsin connection. So did you get a chance to cheer at Wisconsin?
I actually didn't. Our Wisconsin Minnesota game always ended up being around Thanksgiving. So sometimes girls on my team would travel or cheer at the game. I've cheered the games at Minnesota when we played Wisconsin. But I never got to cheer at Camp Randall. It would have been awesome, but my dad would show up wearing a Wisconsin Badgers shirt and a Minnesota hat, and people are like, "Sam, your dad's confused. I don't know what's going on here." But it was a fun rivalry, and I'd have to say I'm still a Minnesota fan to disappoint my family.
That's okay. Hey, you gotta stay loyal.
Exactly.
That jump around experience, I think, is one of the coolest experiences in college football, though, to be fair.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. It's an amazing tradition, and you can't not love it. You just even when I hear it, I think of Wisconsin, and like, it's so cool. I mean, Wisconsin's a great like sports state, very similar to Mass. So, I mean, it's just a great tradition. It's awesome.
I love it. Look, one of the things you talk about that really resonates with me is this like your accountability and connection to your teammates. We've fortunately we've gotten to work with a lot of college cheerleaders and professional cheerleaders. Um, and you know, there's some old stodgy folks that we work with, like, oh, like you said athletes, and I'm like, dude, do you know anything about like what it takes to compete at that level? Like,
Yeah.
just comment on like the commitment that you had to make to cheer at the Big Ten level. Like, I don't think people really appreciate how hard you guys work.
Oh yeah, and I mean, listen, like every cheerleader, every dancer has heard that. Like it's just like an ongoing thing that we'll always get. Most of us have like a canned response. We try to get defensive about it, but I mean, what a lot of people don't realize is like, you know, you think of the cheerleaders, they're on the field, and like that's mostly when you see them. And for most of the schools that are competing at a national level, and that's why I picked Minnesota because it was a competitive school. There's football season and then there's national season. So you know, we had, you know, our 2-a-days and our long weeks, just like any other sport would have them. And on top of a lot of that stuff, just like the athletic stuff and practices and games, and, you know, a game is basically a practice. It's just like 8 hours long of a day. But outside of that, it was also like appearances and showing up at, you know, like alumni events or booster events and things like that. So even on top of it, like, there's that other aspect that not a lot of people think about. So huge time commitment, like yes, in the Big Ten, but probably just for like most college programs, like you've got a lot going on. You're expected to be everywhere. So yeah, it was big time commitment, but obviously super worth it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, like I'm defending the wall, Samantha. So don't worry. I got your guys back because I definitely understand that. Going back to your teammates, how do you think your teammates would describe you from your Minnesota days?
Yeah, that's a fun question. I would say like pretty outgoing. Like I've always been kind of one to speak up and hopefully, you know, like be a leader. I would say like in the younger years, like definitely eager to prove myself. Like we had a tough team of like veterans who, you know, they were pretty disciplined on us. And I think they would describe me as someone who was just like constantly trying to, you know, like impress them, impress the coaches, like do what's needed to be done. But then once I got into the later years of, you know, junior and senior year, hopefully, you know, they saw me as a leader, someone they could come talk to. I tended to be, I feel like maybe on like the, I don't know, harder side of coaching. Like I liked kind of the more like disciplinary or like, I don't know, the tough coach, you could say. I'm thinking of like what the girls would say if they thought I was kind of tough, but hopefully someone they could come talk to or motivate them when it's a rough day. But definitely outgoing, team player, maybe a little harsh. I hope not, but we'll see.
Listen, I operate from the belief that like candor is kindness, and sometimes people need to hear the truth, and it might not come off as nice, but I'd rather be told the truth than like, you know, lied to. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's a good characteristic, not a bad one.
I'm going to steal that phrase, by the way. Candor is kindness. I'm definitely going to be using that going forward.
You can. I only want credit twice, and then it's fully yours, 100%.
Fair enough.
That's my rule, because I'm going to steal something from you today too. So don't worry about that.
No, trade.
So you wrap up in Minnesota, right? What was, I guess, before I get into the transition, what was your major? What did you go into college thinking that you were going to do, Samantha?
Yeah, kind of funny. So all throughout like high school, when you're starting to think about what you want to do in college, I really had it in my head that I was going to be some sort of doctor or like surgeon or something medical. You know, like my dad started his career as an x-ray tech. Since then, he's been in sales for a very long time. But I was like, yeah, I could definitely go this medical route. And, you know, they talk about the weed out classes that they put the freshmen in to make sure, you know, the people who are going to put the work in are going to stay in the program. It weeded me out so fast. It was like Chem 1. I was like, nope, I know that this is not the path for me. And I accepted it so early, was fine with that. So very quickly transitioned into business management as my major, it was business marketing, my major, and then management as my minor. So very quickly made the shift into business.
Now, with that shift, and by the way, I got weeded out of being a doctor like freshman in high school chemistry. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
Like periodic table? I'm out. No thanks.
same.
But like, so business management is and business and man like very, business marketing management, very broad kind of focus areas. Was there a plan, or it was kind of like, I know I want to work in business, and I'm gonna kind of feel this out over the next few years?
Yeah. I mean, after that shift, I was like, you know what? I know it's either going to be sales or marketing. I wasn't quite sure if I was going to, which one I would be good at, which one I would prefer. So in my mind, I was like, you know what? Just get a business degree. Like I'll find my way somehow. And knowing the program, like there were marketing classes. We were lucky enough to have like one sales class, and I think they were starting to make a sales team at that time, like kind of when I was exiting. But yeah, I knew it was going to be sales or marketing, and figured, I'd find the path once I picked that program.
Now I saw you did some internships in college. Was that your first, well, and other than your dad being in sales, did you get exposed to a sales career in those internships as well?
Yeah, so that was my plan. And I mean, I was really lucky to have part of my cheer schedule to allow for some sort
Yeah.
of internship or something to do during the summers, or honestly even during the school year I was doing it as well, and somehow management. But funny enough, I decided, all right, I'll do one internship that's marketing, and then I'll try another one that's sales. So I think I started with the marketing one, if I have my dates correctly. And so quickly I was like, I am not good at this. Like I remember going through Canva, or like trying to make a newsletter for this company, and I was like, I don't like this. I'm not good at it. It doesn't look pretty. Like I just knew it wasn't for me. So I was like, all right, marketing, cross it off the list. Totally fine with that. And then my first real sales internship, it's kind of a funny story looking back, but I saw this internship. I knew one of the gymnasts at school who was doing it. So I was like, okay, like if she's doing it, like it's got to be good. And I got there on my first day, and I was really excited. It was for like internet and cable. And I got there, and I really liked the boss and everything. And we're talking about our territory. We're doing some territory planning. And I'm like, great, I'm learning things about territories and stuff. And then it was like lunchtime, and they're like, all right, did you bring your tennis shoes? And I was like, what do you mean, did I bring my tennis shoes? And they're like, come on, we're going out to territory. You'll be more comfortable. And I don't know if I didn't think it out. They definitely didn't tell me, but I very quickly realized it was a door-to-door sales internship. And I just remember walking door to door with my like mentor at the time. And I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like I grew up in the house where if someone rang the doorbell, like we'd hit the deck, like no one's answering, like we were all hiding. And I was like, wow, I'm ringing the doorbell right now. So I just remember after that first day, I went in the car and called my parents. I was probably crying. I'm like, oh, I thought I had this great internship. And they're like, you don't have to do it. Like, if you don't like it, we can find something else. And I was like, well, I'll probably learn something. I think I had in my head, like, I think Mark Cuban did door to door at one point in his life. Like, maybe I'll learn something here. And I stuck with it for another like 2.5 months. It was in the summer, and I played like the Minnesota cheerleader card, and used what I had. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
ended up going well, and I was glad I did it, but I was also glad to be done with it afterwards. So that was a bit of my internship experience. I had a couple other internships, but that one's probably the most notable.
I love door knockers. Like if you can go do that, by the way, like cold calling like a CISO, that's pretty easy versus like showing up on their cul-de-sac and on at like dinner time and knocking on their door. It lowers the bar of fear significantly after you do that. Did you feel that way when you moved more
Oh
into
yeah,
B2B?
absolutely. I was like, I would even think about it when I would start cold calling some days when, there's some days you're just not feeling it, or you don't want to get rejected or whatever it is. And I'm like, no, people used to slam their door in my face. Like it really can't get much more personal and worse than that. Like the worst they can do is say no. So It definitely prepped me for calling people about cybersecurity. It's
Yeah,
a little
absolutely.
easier. Yeah.
What like so you had like kind of sales and marketing, you're gonna do two internships, you know that marketing isn't it, but then your first sales experience is knocking on doors. But obviously there was something about the profession of sales that drew you to it to like when you graduated get that first role. What was it that you liked about sales even as a door knocker?
Yeah, it was definitely the people aspect. Like, if I'm thinking back on comparing the day to day, when I was just sitting there looking at the computer all day, maybe talking to my coworkers, if people were around, but I realized very quickly, I was like, I need to be talking to people during the day. I can't just sit behind the desk and, have those different interactions. And sure, like some of them aren't going to be great and it's not going to be a sale every time, but I just remember when I did have a really great interaction, like that rewarding feeling that, anyone in sales gets when you've had a great conversation or you made the sale or whatever your close was. Very quickly, I was like, yeah, this is definitely something that I need to pursue. And, you just never know what your day is going to look like as opposed to what I, experienced in my internship at the time where it just felt a little bit more monotonous. And that's not to say every marketing job is like that, but I needed like the variability and just to be able to talk to people all day.
Yeah, yeah, it is very rewarding. That is definitely the fun part of sales is
Yeah.
that adaptability and that connection, that real relation. You got to build relationships. People have to trust you to buy stuff from you, no matter how good your product is.
Yeah.
What were some of the things you remember about being like, I think your first full-time sales role was at Honeywell, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
What do you remember about being the most challenging part of like that transitional period, going from being a college senior on the cheerleading team at a Big Ten school, and now you're kind of like bottom of the totem pole, entry level sales. Like what were some of the things you were battling with going through your head at that time?
Yeah, I mean, bottom of the totem pole, like that's definitely one of them, right? Because you're coming off of being a senior, like you're a hot shot, everyone knows who you are, you're at the top, and then it changes your whole life. You're going into the office every day. I was lucky enough to start in, it was called like a sales rotational program. It was the first year Honeywell was doing it. That's what drew me to it. I was like, hey, I'll learn something here. But I would say, yeah, just the shift from the routine that you're used to and really just, it was hard when you don't know what you don't know. Like a lot of people going into sales are like, well, I maybe think I'm outgoing, like maybe I'm a good listener, and things that you those soft skills that you have. But there was so much more to learn, and like with Honeywell, not only transitioning into like a new career, but I was selling like HVAC, like building controllers, just stuff. I was like, I don't know why they picked me, but here we are. So that aspect of it. I mean, you're always learning, especially like in the software world because things are always changing. But I would say just transitioning into a brand new world, like a brand new language. When you start a new job, you got to know all the acronyms and how things work. So it's tough and it's a transition, but it just takes time and you get there.
You keep saying like whatever, I'll learn here. It feels like you kind of approach these things, these transitions, these changes with like a real open mind and intellectual curiosity. Do you feel like that's made a big difference for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know who told me this at one point or if I heard it on a podcast or something, but it's always stuck in my head of like just constantly put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Like if you feel like you don't know what it is or you're not necessarily confident on, oh, I'm going to know everything going into this, that's a good thing, right? So, I mean, I did that with Honeywell. I did it with Zscaler, my current company, and even just the newer role that I took here. A lot of unknowns, like not very comfortable with everything, but I think that's kind of the point, right? So I've just always had that like, okay, if it makes me feel a little uncomfortable, that's probably a good thing, and I'll have something to learn and add to my tool set.
Now, was Honeywell how you ended up out in Massachusetts in New England? They moved you out here for a role?
Yeah, so the sales rotational program lasted around 18 months or so. It was kind of loose towards the end, and we went into it. It was me and another guy. We went into it knowing the sales organization was a field sales org. So it wasn't like, oh, all the sellers are in the office here. So
Yeah.
they're like, hey, we're going to bring you into this program. There might be a position that opens up and it could be anywhere. So I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's see what they've got. And then towards the end of the program, I heard about kind of through the grapevine, oh, there might be an opening out in Boston. And I was like, sure, I've been to Boston once when I was 13 on a trip with my family or something. And I wanted it. So I was like, yeah, let's go east and try something different. So yeah, I came out with Honeywell and then worked the like whole New England territory for however long I was out here. So maybe like 2 years I was doing that. So yeah, I was driving around all around New England, calling on like building contractors and distributors and things like that. So that's what brought me out here.
It's amazing. I always tell people that I obviously born and raised here. I've lived in other places, but I always tell people like, welcome to Massachusetts. The traffic sucks, the taxes are high, people are mean, but the food's also terrible. No, but it's a great place, and I think the one thing we share in common with the Midwest is there's a lot of authenticity here. It's just our
Mm-hmm.
authenticity it has a little edge to it.
Yeah, which I don't mind, and it's funny you say that. I've always told people that too. People ask me all the time, like, "Why'd you go from Wisconsin to Boston?" And I'm like, there's things that are very different about them, but I would say like the authenticity. You know where you stand with people in both states, and maybe it comes across a little differently at times, which is fine, but. People are really down to earth. It's kind of a salt of the earth place, and I think Wisconsin's like that too. So it's kind of made me feel a little bit at home in a way.
I love it. I love it. So you get maybe you get these calls, right? This is kind of like the foundation of Shift Group because I got so many of these calls from hockey players because of my background and my family. But you get a call from like a senior at Minnesota, a cheerleader, and she kind of says like, "Hey, I'm thinking about sales. Talk me through like how's that conversation go? What are the things you're asking, getting them to think about, and like how are you guiding them?"
Yeah, I mean, first thing I guess I would say, like why? What do you like about it? Learn and figure out, is it the people aspect? Are you money motivated? Like that's always a big one, right? Or what would you want a day-to-day to look like? Do you like kind of sitting back? Are you comfortable talking to people that you don't know? Thinking about those things. And then, I would probably encourage them to network as much as they possibly can. Like I wouldn't have found Zscaler if I wasn't, talking to friends through the grapevine, figuring out what's good. Do some research on companies you think you like. Like I remember really, really thinking Salesforce was such a cool company and it would be so great to do this. And, I started talking to people. How did you get working there? Like, what does your day to day look like? And, we do it all the time. Like I'll get a LinkedIn message from someone, hey, tell me about your company. What are you liking about it? So I would just encourage them, like, talk to as many people as you can and, just evaluate, like, what have you done that sounds similar? Did you like it? A lot of the cheerleading aspects involves like talking to people you don't know, being a good listener, being present, showing up, all of that stuff. So, I could see it being a good fit on paper, but really just digging into like, are you actually interested in some of these also tougher spots? Like, are you comfortable not having a lot of direction? Like, do you feel like you've got that self-discipline to get up and make a plan and, kind of run a business? So those are some of the things I think of off the bat.
I like that you ask them about financial motivation because I think it's important, right? Like it's taboo to talk about, but my whole perspective is like if you're okay with an average salary, and like checking don't do sales. Like there's too much, it's too stressful. There's too much pressure. Like you should really be driven to make as much money as you possibly can, and then the hard parts of sales are a little easier to get through. So that's a good place to start with people, I think.
Yeah. And I think I'd also add like, just try it, get into
Yeah.
it. Like you're
Yeah.
never really going to know until you do it. And, my example was a little smaller with like the marketing internship, but when you're early enough in your career, like, most of these graduates are probably going to go into some sort of BDR role, and like that's a grinded out role. Get in it, figure out if it's worth it to you. I would say it's still early enough to make a shift, even if it's at the same company, and maybe there's something in a different department that you might like more, but you're never really going to know until you get into it. And I think, being so young, they'd have enough time to make a shift if they needed to.
My whole, hopefully you appreciate this, but like my whole hypothesis on Shift Group is like sales. I don't care what you want to be when you grow up. If you should spend a couple years as a salesperson to like, because like the skills you learn, right? First and foremost, like getting a stranger's attention, asking them the right questions to understand like what they care about and like what their problems are and what their goals are, and then standing and delivering a message to like
Mm-hmm.
communicate to them why like whatever action you want them to take is going to help them achieve those goals or solve those problems. You can apply that to being in marketing, accounting, HR. Dude, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, like you have to do that on a daily basis. So like there's something to be said. I always say like everyone should work in the service industry at some point, like be a bartender and be a waiter just to appreciate what that's
Yeah.
all about. And I think everybody in the business world should have a quota at some point in their life too, and like have to be a salesperson. So I love
Yeah.
that. I love
Yeah,
that.
no, I agree with you. I mean, I remember talking to someone in marketing at Honeywell, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I did sales for a few years. The money was great, but I learned a lot, and I just couldn't do it, and I shifted to marketing." But she always said, "I was so glad I did it because I know, and it translates. Like a lot of those skills will translate, like you're saying, to a lot of those other professions."
It does. And listen, the reality is, and I'm definitely a product of this. Like you don't really know who you are and what you want until probably 4 or 5 years into like the real world, out of college, no more keg stands, you got bills to pay. Like
Hopefully.
it takes some time to like have self-awareness. There's very few 22 to 24-year-old people that have self-awareness yet. Like they haven't been through enough to know who they are yet. So I think it's a good place to learn a little bit about yourself. Um, I love that idea of the rotational program at Honeywell. What do you think, like, forget about public, private, forget about, in office, remote, like, what do you think some of the key characteristics of a company are to start, specifically to start your career, your sales career? Like, first place you're going to go, learn the foundation and be around people. What is that company, what should that company look like for a new to salesperson?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple things come to mind. I would say the first one is learn as much as you can about like how much are they valuing a training program, like Zscaler, for example. Great training. Like, we do training with our group, with our teams. Sometimes it's a Zoom training, but like there is constantly something that we're learning more about, whether it's on the sales side or the technical side, so that we can be better equipped to chat about what our product does. But I would say training, like learn as much as you can. And a lot of companies, I think, will say like, yeah, we've got great training. And that's where, do some research and talk to some people who work at a company you might be interested in and learn more about that. And then I think the other obvious one is just like career progression. Like get an idea of, let's say you're starting as a BDR or maybe an AE, like get an idea of how long some of these folks have been in that position. Are you wanting to move up within the company? Do they like to promote from within? Like I would say find a company that, you really could see yourself growing into, and just like growing as an individual as well. So like training, career progression. And I think another one is like maybe the size of the company. Like you're probably going to have a totally different experience working at, a more startup, smaller company where, you might get more access to people who are higher up. You might, all be on the sales floor together if maybe you're required to go into work. Like that's a great way to learn and, see what others are doing versus maybe if it's too big and there's not that, like on-site resource for you, maybe it could slow things down a little bit, or maybe you want that. So I would say like evaluate those things just to get an idea of what the day-to-day is going to look like. And then, like what's it going to look like in a year when I'm still here, 2 years and things like that.
Yeah, I think every person's different. So anybody who gives advice in absolutes, I think you got to take that with a grain of salt. If someone says big companies are better, small companies are better. It's like, no, it depends on the person, right? I think I thrived in like an early stage, like figure it out as you go, wear a lot of hat type of environment. Had I gone into like where a lot of my friends went into like the EMC program, now Dell or like, Oracle or one of these big, humongous companies where they spent like 3 months in a classroom before they got on the phone, I would have ended up burning out and not lasting and having the career that I did. So, it really depends on the person. Um,
Sure.
One of the things that we talk a lot about, right, is, and I don't know if you know this stat, but only 30% of sales jobs in the United States are filled by females. I
Mm.
have had the pleasure of running full female sales teams, and I'll die on the hill that females are naturally better salespeople because of they have more empathy, typically, scientifically, they're more organized, and I think that there's certain probably not true aspects that they hear about sales that kind of turns them off, which I understand. But we're on the mission, obviously, with the audience we focus on being athletics and military. Those are both higher, especially athletics is 50 at least 50% female by law with Title IX. Um,
Yep.
so we always like to when we get the opportunity to have female sellers on the podcast, like what kind of advice would you give to females that are looking to break into sales? Like what type of mindset should they have? How should they be thinking about it? And anything you can do to get them over the hump of like this is a dude's job, like that would be helpful too.
Yeah, no, I mean it comes up a lot. Like any woman in the industry will have some sort of conversation about this of like, oh, how is it being a girl seller at this company, or what has your experience been? Um, I thought this since my days at Honeywell. Like I was selling into HVAC dudes who have been working in the industry forever. They're working with other guys that are, they've been veterans in this industry for a very long time. And I'd walk in and they're like, "Are you lost? Like, did you walk through the right door?" And wearing my little Honeywell polo. But what I realized very early on is like it helps. Like there is no problem walking in and being not what someone is going to expect. And like while I see, the numbers of females in the industry greatly improving, like even at my own company, like I'm seeing so many more girls getting hired, and it's great. Like use what you have. Don't ever let it, kind of deter you. I think if anything, it helps. And like if you do have stronger empathy, or maybe you are more organized, or maybe you're just not what someone's expecting, great. Like now you've got their attention, so I've always thought of it like that, and try to tell other girls that if they're interested in sales or somehow feel deterred because it's a male dominated industry, I'm like, for now maybe it is. And I'm kind of joking, but like, it's improving. It's not what it used to be. And like, not to get on a soapbox, but like women before us had it really, really hard. So I would say like things are only getting better, and there's always going to be some things that come up. It is what it is. But don't let that deter you, because if anything, it's going to help you. That's always been my mindset.
I was gonna say, don't like my advice is like this is an advantage to you, not a
Yeah,
disadvantage. Like this is a good thing, and you need to leverage it and put it to work for yourself. Um,
absolutely.
so good. All right, we have just making sure. Yeah, two final questions we ask every guest. Um, First one is why do you love sales, Samantha?
Oh gosh, why do I love sales? I mentioned it earlier. I really like that my day is going to be a little different every single day. Like I get bored really quickly, a little shorter of an attention span. I'm not afraid to admit that. It's nice to have something like constantly changing. You're talking to new people, sometimes you'll have a conversation that goes so great and you're like, "Wow, I loved how that went. Like I love this customer, and I want to work with them." Like the relationship part is really fun for me. Like when you get to build a connection with someone, it makes work so much more fun, right? Like it changes your day to day. So I think finding those is really fun. And I mean, we talked about it again earlier. Like I'm money motivated. Like, it's nice to see your hard work pay off. And, it's hard when it doesn't. Like, there's a lot of times you work really hard for something and you lose it for whatever reason. But like when you win it and, you get the PO or the DocuSign or whatever it is, like, there's just, I don't know, there's no better feeling other than, cheerleading at a Big Ten football game. But it really is just, I don't know, it's great to see your hard work pay off. And then you get a nice check from it, and you can travel or do whatever you need to do.
Yeah, buy nice stuff. There, I think like where the relationship thing really plays is if you're authentic and building relationships. Ultimately, your job as a salesperson is to help people solve problems, right? So like if you sincerely go in like thinking like I really want to get to know this person, understand their world, then you're going to be pretty successful because you're going to be honest with them and you're going to say like, listen, you're doing it this way. Here's the negative consequences of doing it this way. Like very, very bluntly, like this is the way that we do it. And this is why these are the positive business outcomes that you can drive with it. And if you mean it like, hey, like I know what your job is. I know what you're trying to accomplish. Like, I think you should do it this way. You don't end up, I think people think of sales as like stuffing something down somebody's throat. And that's really not what it is. It's really getting them to see the world a little differently because they know their world, a lot of different worlds, and you're just trying to educate them. So I think that Midwest authenticity probably pays off for you a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. But I mean, at the end of the day, like people buy from people, right? And if someone's a buyer, like they can sniff out someone who's shoving product down their throat. Like it's not that hard to see, right? So if you got to be yourself, you got to choose your own style. Like don't try to be a hardo if you're not a hardo. Like be authentic, and people can see that, I think. And whenever you're buying something personally, like you can feel it. So that, yeah, I mean, the relationship piece is huge, and it's fun when it works out nicely.
I love it. So last question. When I first started the company, a lot of my, friends, people in our network were like, JR, how come you're only focusing on athletes and veterans? And like my instinct was pretty simple. I just said, I don't need to explain to somebody who competes at that level and wears a uniform what it means to be dialed in. And I know when I look back at my, long sales career, long sales leadership career, any great rep that I had, if somebody was like, hey, what's Samantha like? The way I described him was like, she was dialed in. She is dialed in. So the question is, what does it mean to be dialed in for you as a sales professional?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, being dialed in is like cancel out the noise, because there's going to be a lot of noise, especially in sales, a lot of admin, a customer thing here, a support thing there, some issue with Salesforce. Like there's always going to be something happening on the outside. Just cancel it out, focus. Like my mom always says this, like make the most important thing the most important thing. And like, to your words, like dial in on that. So I feel like when I'm dialed in, I've got it all canceled out, and I'm just getting done what needs to get done. And I guess the other one I would say is like done is better than perfect. Like that's something I always come back to as well. So when I'm dialed in, like just get it done. It doesn't necessarily have to be the perfect thing. Like it's better to just, get it done and move on. So yeah, I mean, cancel out the noise, get your shit done. Like, that's kind of how I see it.
I think you just named our episode, Samantha. Make the most important thing the most important thing. I love that. I told you I was going to steal. I'm stealing that from you, from your mom via you, just so you know.
Yeah, I gave my mom credit. Like you'll see, I'll give you credit when I steal your phrase. But my mom's gonna love this now. I can't wait to send it to her.
Well, shout out to Mama Bear. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us. This is an awesome conversation. We really appreciate you giving us your time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. It was fun.
This wraps up this episode of Merchants of Change. If you enjoyed this episode, the most meaningful way to say thanks is to submit a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're interested in working with us, please come find us at www.shiftgroup.io.